My name is Joe Saul-Sehy. We have a little podcast called Stacking Benjamins. And our podcast, we grew not through clever advertising. We've had an advertising budget until recently was absolutely zero. Not because we have phenomenal production qualities. Our production quality, I think, is decent, but it's not the best. It's not wonderful. It's not NPR quality. But I think the reason why our show has grown is because of the way that we format the show. We actually have thought about all the pieces of the show that might be friction for our listeners, and we've tried to eliminate that friction. So that's what I want to go through today, is how to create a podcast that just by people tuning in and listening gets them to come back, gets them to tell their friends, and then gives you accelerating growth. So I'll show you ours. This is the growth of our podcast, and you'll see that for the first couple of years, it felt like nobody was really listening. But we stayed at it, and we kept going, and we kept fixing, and we kept fixing, and we kept fixing. And I'm going to take you through a lot of the mistakes that we made so you don't make half them. We made some doozies. We screwed up a lot of stuff, and I'm going to show you a lot of that today. When I talk to podcasters, a lot of the time they're like, well, so-and-so has, they did this thing, that they were this person. I'll tell you that really doesn't matter. For me, I was a spokesperson for Ameriprise Financial and American Express for a while. People go, well, he did the media thing. You know what? What you need to do has nothing to do with any of this. I was on the radio. I was on television. The experience of mine that really mattered is stuff that all of us can do, which are these things. I watch a ton of movies. Last year, I think I watched 74 movies. And then I rank them because I'm a geek, right? And I'll tell you, there's something about the pacing of a movie that's just like a podcast. If you can pace your podcast and it has a nice pace, you're going to have a much better podcast than one that's, these movies that you fire up on Netflix and then you turn them off. Movies really help us pace our show. I listen to a ton of other podcasts. I'm always amazed when I talk to podcasters that are just people getting ready to start, and I ask them, so what podcast do you like? Well, I don't really listen to shows, but other people have shows, so I want to have a show. You really have to listen to a lot of shows. And for a long time, I listened to podcasts, and people said, Joe, you should start a podcast. And I said, well, I don't really have anything to say. Everybody's kind of saying what I want to say, so there's nothing, I don't want to have a Me Too show. And it was only by listening to a lot of those shows that I could do. Anybody know this book, Steal Like an Artist? This is one of my favorite books. It's this guy, Austin Kleon. And Austin talks about stealing stuff in a way that's not plagiarism. Take stuff that you like from movies, from podcasts, from around you, and make it your own. So don't steal it, but steal it like an artist. Don't plagiarize. That's horrible. Take things. I'm going to show you today some of the inspiration for our show. And if you go and you listen to Stacking Benjamins, if you hadn't been here in the audience, I don't think you'd ever know that where our inspiration came from, because we changed it and we put our little spin on it. So I finally realized on a run one day that what I wanted to say was a lot like what these guys say. I realized that in finance at the time, there was nobody doing car talk. Everybody familiar with car talk? If you're not familiar, I'm going to play a little bit of car talk for you right now so you can get these guys are click and clack, and this is them talking car talk.
Broadcasting this week from the newsroom here at Car Talk.
No, we haven't.
Well, we did yesterday. Now, we know that All Things Considered in Morning Edition can't cover every story that's out there. I mean, it's just impossible, right?
It is.
So in the interest of public service, here are a few headlines from last year that our premier news shows probably missed.
These are real headlines from newspapers.
Yeah.
Here's one. Police begin campaign to run down jaywalkers. How about this? Panda mating fails. Veterinarian to take over.
That show's called Car Talk. How much of that's about cars? And all of a sudden I realized that this is what I wanted to do with finance. I wanted to have a very light show. Instead of being the last word in finance, I wanted to be the first word. So I listened to Car Talk and I said, where do we fit in? Because there were a lot of people already doing great stuff. There were fantastic advice shows, phenomenal guru shows. There were helping people get rich quicker shows. There were technical shows, hot stock tip shows. I wasn't going to compete with any of that. There was no way I was going to do that. So I needed to know where we fit. And for us, and this is not for you, but it's just something for you to think about, is where do you really fit? For us, we wanted it to be casual, we want it to be relaxed, we want it to be funny. In fact, if you've ever listened to our show or you've read our reviews, our fans say that if you ever learn anything listening to Stacking Benjamins, keep it to yourself. Right? That's your problem. And we love that. People call into our show and they say, Joe, you'll be happy to hear I've never learned a thing listening to you, but I'm going to ask you a question anyway. Awesome. That's great. So for us, that's what we wanted. So for you, you want it to be the same thing. You don't want to have a Me Too show. So think about what's the landscape look like and where can you niche yourself and be something that somebody else isn't. And that's the way I think that you start off with designing your show. Once you've done that, then you got to do the next thing, which is one thing I think we did pretty well. There's this, Nike has this phrase, just do it, right? That's their slogan. I like the slogan they have before just do it, which doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. Nike said, feel the fear and do it anyway. That was the one before it. So you can see why they changed it. But I prefer feel the fear, but do it anyway is my mantra, because I feel a lot of fear. Who's sitting here in the room that hasn't yet started a podcast? You're just about to. I'll tell you, we did that for a year. We were just about to for a year. I wish we would have started a year earlier. And now we've been podcasting for 5 years, and the biggest mistake we made was not feeling the fear and just doing it. So the one thing that we did really well when we finally did start, which was a year late, we said, okay, our idea's not perfect, our show's not perfect, so we created this show. We created the show, we own this website called The Free Financial Advisor. We used to own it. So we created a show. We knew we wanted to be casual and funny, so we called it The Worst of the Free Financial Advisor. We also knew the show was going to suck, so we called it The Worst of the Free Financial Advisor for that reason also. And we knew that this wasn't going to be our end show, so we decided that, like baseball, this was going to be spring training. We knew that this baby was going to die, so we gave it an unlucky number of episodes. It ran 13 episodes on purpose. We got to about episode 7 or 8, and we got we got 85% of the kinks out. How do you upload your show? What are your microphone settings that are right? I was talking to Jonathan last night at a thing from Choose Fi. Is he here? I was just talking to him last night, and he was talking about how long did it take you to figure out how to level your audio so your guest isn't way louder than you. The first 4 months I had a show, I spent tons of time like adjusting people's levels up and down. There's a program that actually does that. I had no idea. Just launch. Just do it. The things to do: read, watch, listen to other people's stuff, know what the landscape is, decide where you fit, and then do it. Kim. There's 2 different ones. We use Levelator, and there's another one. Roger, what's the other one? Roger doesn't know. Who knows the other? What's the other one? Aphonic. Yeah, which one? You know what? Levelator is only for Levelator is only for Mac. Is Levelator only for Mac? I don't know. Levelator or Aphonic. You can see what a technical pro I am. Yeah, I'm not great at that, but this is what I like talking about, is creating your best show. So now that we've launched, now let's show you how to do this. All right, Marriott did a study a number of years ago, and they looked at how long it takes somebody to decide if they like the hotel or not. Like from the time that they get to the front door, how long does it take them to decide if they like it? Anybody know how long it was? 2 minutes. It's 2 minutes. And if you've gone on iTunes and you've listened to a podcast for the first time, how many minutes do you give it before you're like, yeah, this sucks? I think I give it like 2 minutes, right? Max, I give it 2 minutes. So realize that on your show, people are going to give you not much time. And if you're reaching out to that brand new listener, you can't say, well, that preamble was long, but we'll fix it next time. you want to be like Marriott and get into it right away. Let me play. Jen Hemphill has a fantastic podcast called Her Money Matters, and she's been a real trooper letting me show this because this is something that in our mastermind group we work with Jen on. And let's play something from her 3rd episode.
Episode number 3 of the Her Money Matters podcast. Danielle Morel.
Welcome to the Her Money Matters podcast, the podcast to help you take control of your finances. Join your host, motivational money coach, Jen Hemphill, as she shares with you practical, simple money insights and real-life stories by women like you. Let's get to it.
Hello there. Welcome back again to the Her Money Matters podcast. I'm so excited to have you listening today for...
All right, so Jen's beginning had a lot of friction in the beginning, and if you listen to the beginning of her show now, it's completely different than what we just heard. First thing is, she has announcer dude say her name and say the name of the show, and what's the first thing she does? She says the name of her show again. So my question is, why do we have announcer dude say it, and then she says it? I don't understand that. Then my next question is, what's the name of her show? Why do we have announcer dude? It's called Her Money Matters, and she's got a dude who's introducing her. So let's get rid of the dude and let's make it her money, right? And these are things I think that we don't think of. We think we have to have an announcer person because that's what professional shows do, right? We've got to have this slick intro, and because we don't listen to that intro at the beginning, the first thing we think we get on the mic to warm ourselves up is we say the name of our show, we introduce ourselves again, forgetting that we had somebody just do that. So if we just eliminate that friction, that right there is a big win for your podcast. Top podcasts, people say, have a great announcer person opening them. So let me show you let's listen to some top podcasts and let's listen to how they open.
Every year in the fall, in countries all over the world,
This American
signs
Life.
go up advertising a lottery. A lottery whose winners move to the United States, get a green card, and become Americans. And then that might sound crazy to you and impossible.
That's the very beginning of the show. No announcer, no nothing, right into it.
WNYC Studios.
Scott, let's go. No, I'm Eddie. They sound the same, but I'm always Eddie Vedder. I'm never Scott Stapp.
Anytime someone's trying to impersonate me, they're like, dude, I sing your songs in karaoke, man. Check it out.
Interviewing
Dude,
Eddie
you
Vedder.
can't blame me for getting two stupid things confused.
Okay, but Eddie Vedder.
That's the very beginning of the show. No announcer person, nothing into it. They're interviewing Eddie Vedder.
He's doing the Friday college football podcast.
Nice.
Lives in Memphis. Big Tennessee fan, obviously.
Oh, boy.
That game. Let's talk about that, actually. Let's go. Oh, I don't have any music. Yeah, we're in year 2 of the BS podcast. I need new music. If
Maybe you should sing some Pearl Jam or something. That should be the start.
That's how Joe made an email address for us. BS Pod Music.
The Grantland podcast, this is going to play for 3 more, and I'm just going to turn it down, but I think you get my point. Top podcasts, they know that you clicked on it. If I'm listening to Roger's show, I look at that thing on iTunes or wherever I listen, Apple Podcasts now, excuse me. I click on it. I know it says Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney, and I know what it says the podcast is about. Top podcasts don't have an announcer person. They don't have a big long intro. They hit it right away. And so I think that's something I see that we can get rid of a lot of friction by doing it that way. So get to the meat as soon as possible. If you have cheesy announcer dude, as I call him, and by the way, if you've listened to my show, I have cheesy announcer dude. But I'm going to tell you why we have cheesy announcer dude. But think about why you do that. What purpose does that serve for your show? And how do we get into it? So we are stealing like an artist. We're going to take things that we like. We're going to honor them, study them, steal from a lot of people. We'll credit where we got it from. We're going to transform it and remix it so it's just like us. So let me show you kind of a little bit about our show as an example. So I really like late night TV. You'll see that on the main stage today. that I really like late night TV. And anybody watch this guy? Let's listen to the open of the Tonight Show. Oh, I better turn up.
From Studio 16 in Rockefeller Center in the heart of New York City, The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Tonight join Jimmy the Cat, Ashton Kutcher, Issa Rae, Bill Skogan, Nora Jones, and featuring the legendary Roots Crew. 548 Ontario! And now, here he is, Jimmy
Jimmy comes out. You know how long the open is? Feels like it's forever. 37 seconds. 37 seconds for this open. You know exactly who's going to be on the show. You know exactly what's coming. If you look at the actual, which I didn't show you the video, but it starts off black and white, becomes color. It's fun. It's quick. It's punchy. It's distinctly New York. He tells you exactly where you're going to be. So you feel like you're there in Rockefeller Center with him, with his guest, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be upbeat, right? For him, that's what they did. Here are, if you look at for those of you that have podcasts, how much time do you spend looking at your one-star reviews? Like, I spend way too much time. But, and some of them are pretty funny. My favorite one-star review of our show was just boo, with like 18 O's. I get all the like articulate haters. But these are two that I found really interesting because they were a big problem for our show in the early days. This podcast could be edited down to remove half the waste of your time. Well, wait a minute. I told you earlier, my whole show is meant to be a waste of your time, right? So if somebody thinks that they're going to come in and not have their time wasted, then I'm doing something wrong. In fact, they said, you know, if you removed all the comedy, the bad comedy from the show, like it would be a decent financial show. So we actually did something different than what I think that reviewer did. They wanted us to cut out the comedy. We started taking comedy classes, reading comedy material. I was going to give them more of it. We were going to make it better. And success of the podcast went to the host's head. Once you reach past the point of learning about the basics of personal finance, there's no reason to keep subscribing to this. You can get most of the information from a good personal finance book, or heck, even the Reddit Personal Finance or Reddit Financial Independence. Well, yeah, I don't want you to get any of that stuff from my show. Like, this person's exactly right. You can get it. So is the problem the reviewer, or is the problem my show? The problem is people are coming into my show with a set of expectations that are different than what I want to deliver, right? So my problem is when people walk into my Marriott, I'm not giving them clues about the experience that they should expect from Stacking Benjamins. So for us, we had to introduce how our show was different. We had to give it, like New York City, we wanted to give it a sense of place, so that you were coming to this place and we were together. I love listening to podcasts that have a sense of place, that I feel like I'm right there. I'm a runner, and I love running with podcasts because it gets rid of all the pain. Well, some of the pain. It's rid of a piece of the pain. But I love that. Jen, you missed the part about you. You were the star earlier. And I also needed people to know right away that we're not going to be gurus. It's not going to be technical. This is a podcast where it's surround sound, like car talk. I want people to enjoy talks about money. I want them to maybe pick up 7 or 8 different things, and then they go deeper with a different podcast, right? So for us, we then had to do a few things. Number one, we changed our cover art. If you think you're going to get wisdom and nuggets from a podcast that has a dude with a bag over his head, okay. So we changed that specifically so that you wouldn't think I'm coming here to get nuggets. Then the second thing we did was we changed our opening.
What's this podcasting thing all about? How come you can't have those keg parties and chase girls like other nice boys?
That's my mom. And then we have cheesy announcer guy, my mom's neighbor, Doug.
I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and this is the Stacking Benjamin Show.
You hear the Tonight Show?
Hey, we're working on a big show today because we're back enjoying another round of your letters. Also, how much money does your company lose due to NCAA pools? We'll talk about the tournament and your work with the co-author of the book, The Future-Proof Workplace, Morag Barrett. And that's not all. We'll throw out the Haven Lifeline to a lucky listener and still leave time for the hardest working segment of this show, My Trivia. And here they are, two guys who think it's always time for a work break, Joe and O-G-G-G-G.
I'm exhausted already. We haven't started yet.
I'm always exhausted, dude.
So our show, we created that open to solve several problems. One problem we had was people like, I like the fact that your show has a lot of different segments, but we didn't tell people that. Like people were what is this? How come you talk about one thing and talk about another thing? Like, what's your show about? Like us trying to describe a single episode of the Stacking Benjamin show is difficult. So cheesy announcer guy, like the Tonight Show, we wanted to have him say live from Joe's mom's basement, give it a sense of place. And then now we're bringing people down to the basement and hi, I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug. So once again, if you listen to that beginning, so if you click on a show called Stacking Benjamins with a dude with a bag on his head, and then you hear my mom say, how come you guys can't be cool and have keg parties instead of being nerds talking about money? Then you have this guy say, I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, live from Joe's mom's basement, and you want to give me a 1-star review because we're not giving you nuggets? Right? I really hope that people that come to our show have a much better feeling of what they're getting into. So your show's not going to be like that. But you definitely want to look at those first few minutes and say, how do I get rid of all that friction? How do I make sure that the beginning slides people into the rest of the show? And also, look at your 1-star reviews because they'll give you real clues about what you can fix. Because people usually don't listen very long if they don't like your show. So for me, when I listen to a podcast, I want it to be a little like Disney World. I want people to come down to my mom's basement. My guests come, they sit across the rickety card table from me. We got a stack of books with a microphone. What's funny is sometimes our guests come down and we had a guest come and the very first thing that he said, he's like, does your mom know that floorboard, like the third stair, that floorboard's loose? I'm like, where did he come up with that? A guest like 2 weeks ago said, it doesn't smell as bad down here as I thought it would. You know, and I love the fact that our guests kind of get into it with us. So we're in my mom's half-finished basement. A lot of people think when they hear about Stacking Benjamins that the place where we got our sense of place came from Wayne's World. We're like two guys in their mom's neighbor's basement. We actually thought that it was funny to be in the basement because everybody's trying to pretend like they're not in a closet or they're not in somebody's basement recording stuff. So we're going to own it. But ours came from this woman who has a show on XM Kids called Absolutely Mindy. And when my kids were little, we listened to this show all the time. Mindy is supposedly in her bedroom because she's grounded. And she's supposed to be cleaning her room. But instead, she has a hairbrush. She's using it as a microphone. And she has a satellite radio show where all her friends call in. And I thought that was hilarious. In fact, the first time somebody said, so you guys doing Wayne's World? We are not that cool. We're doing Absolutely Mindy. We're doing this. What I love down here is Mindy's philosophy. While I'd love to wax poetic about my philosophical approach, I don't think that hard about it. When I'm hosting my show, I still feel like I'm playing radio, and I truly believe my listeners feel like they're playing with me. When we first started, we were talking about the basement. I kind of thought after a few episodes, I'm like, this is kind of dumb. Like this is not, so we stopped. And what was funny was we stopped for maybe 8 or 9 episodes, and our listeners started writing to me going, how come you don't talk about what's going on in the basement anymore? Like, what about the basement? So we had to go the other way. We couldn't go halfway. We had to own it. So once we had our place, we had to own that place. And I love the question we get now from people, which is, do you really do your show live from your mom's half-finished basement? And our answer always is yes. So here's what you want to think about. 2 minutes you're open, great meat in the middle, and then a sense of community on the end. And there's some shows I've listened to that do great at part 1 and part 2 here, and they forget part 3, community. I'm going to want to come back to that in a second, because this is a great way to keep people coming back. Another mistake people make, though, is they take the community part and they put it at the beginning. Because if you've ever looked at the stats of your show, Stitcher shows stats, Apple Podcasts are about to show your stats, like how long people listen. What you'll find is you probably have 2/3 more listeners at the beginning of your show than the end. So everybody says, well, I've got my webinar, I've got my book, I've got this stuff I want to sell, I'm going to put that at the beginning. You don't want to put the community at the beginning. And the reason is, the people that love you are the people that are going to buy. The people that don't yet love you are going to think you're a cheap salesperson, I think, if you put it at the beginning. So let people love you first, and then the people that don't really love you, you're not going to upset them because you didn't do it right away. Do it give the people that want to know who you are what they want at the beginning, and then do the community at the end. But let's talk about the meat. Realize this. It's great to have guests, but people don't come back for your guests. People come back for you. So don't spend all of your show talking about your guest and what they do and how cool your guest is. Make sure they know who you are. Anybody listen to Amy Porterfield's podcast? One thing I like about Amy's podcast, there's a bunch of stuff she does at the beginning here that I don't like. And she still has a fantastic show. What I love about the beginning of her show, she always talks about what's going on with her family, what's going on with her life. She doesn't spend a lot of time doing it, but she brings you into her life a little bit, and so you feel like you kind of know who she is. I was at Podcast Movement, not this year, but last year, and Alex Bloomberg of Gimlet Media, Alex Bloomberg was talking about the science of podcasts, and people feel like they know you when they listen to your show. Like, does anybody listen to our show? Does anybody actually listen to us? Do you kind of feel like you know me a little bit? Maybe? Yeah, it's like, I don't want to know you. I want to think about you, dude. But your audience feels like they know you a little bit, so make sure that you realize that. They want one of two things. We get pitched all the time, like if you have a podcast, you probably do. I don't really care about who stars are. I don't care about if you come to me and you go, hey Joe, I'm this expert, I'm this. If you are David Bach, you can come on my show and say whatever you want, because there's name recognition there and my audience knows who you are. But if you're not, when Shannon Allen came on our show, Shannon Allen, our audience doesn't know Shannon. Anybody here know Shannon? Shannon has this horrible story about how she got ripped off to the tune of $52,000. She accidentally wired money to a hacker at her home closing, right? So they had broke in, and anyway, they gave her a different routing number, and she routed this money right to a hacker. She did it. So with Shannon, I was very worried about the story. I really wanted to make sure that we got that story right. And that's going to be most of our show. So how do we do the story right? With Shannon, we did it a little differently, but with most of my interviews, I try to do it like a James Bond movie. James Bond movies start with an action sequence, and so I want to go to the most poignant part, or the toughest question, and I want to ask that one first. And what I find that does is three things. It brings my listener in right away. So when Lisa was on my show, Lisa told an absolutely harrowing story about the time she was at her doctor's office, and she's waiting, and we had her start with this sequence. Very first thing I asked Lisa was to tell me the story. She's at her doctor, she's in the waiting room. This guy comes, Lisa, I'm going to get this wrong a little bit, but this guy comes in, he has a trench coat on, and he starts walking past all the people in the waiting room, and he goes for the doctor door. And the woman at the receptionist says, sir, you can't go in there. And he opens up his trench coat, he's got guns. Do you want to know where that story's going? I'm not going to say, so, Lisa Peterson, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your company. We'll get to all that later. But your audience wants to know Lisa's story, and from that story, then we'll talk about who Lisa is, what she does. So start with the most difficult question, or the most exciting question, the most horrible question in that case, and then go from there. With Shannon, we did a little bit differently because of the fact that a lot of people had bought a house before. we kind of slow played that one because I knew there was this big hook coming. So we talked about how great the experience was, about how fun it was buying her first house, saving up all that money. We described the house, we made it all beautiful. And then the day of the closing, she goes and she wires the money. And then she gets a call from her title company that says, hey, we're excited to see you, just confirming. And by the way, when are you going to wire us that money? And so we kind of slow into that one. But we set up that interview. And a lot of times when I hear interviews, I think we could do that a lot more as a community. We could definitely create an interview that gets right into it. Car chase. This American Life, Ira Glass says this, find a story with an ending you didn't expect. And I love that. Alex Bloomberg says, somebody does something because of blank, but blank. And I try to think about that when I interview. And when I get pitched, somebody said, hey, you should have David Winchell on the show because David is great at this and this and this and this. And I'm like, I don't want to hear any of that. David, tell me a story with an ending that I don't know. If you pitch me that way, so for those of you that are in here wondering how to get on podcasts, that's what I love to hear. Tell me a story where I don't know the end, and I would love to have you on the show. Let's talk about building community. We love answering letters. At the start, I'll tell you the truth about this. We had to seed that. Like at first we said, hey, send us letters. And guess how many people sent us letters? Nobody. And then we said it again, send us letters, nobody. And I thought, if I go like 4 shows in a row saying, send us letters and nobody does, people go, why are we listening to this? I must be the only listener, right? So we had to make some up. And so we made up a few letters at the beginning. And I'll tell you though, once that happened, letters started coming in. And then they came in faster and faster after that. We have a segment on our show called the Haven Lifeline. Which is a whole different thing about creating fun segments. But that was a voicemail segment. And on our voicemail segment, we had to seed that too. I'd have my brother-in-law call. I had my sister call. I had my real mom call. The woman that plays my mom on that thing, that's not really my mom. I had to fire her. She sounds too young. This is actually a neighbor of mine who's got this nice older lady voice, which is awesome. Julie Ray is fantastic. Do all this, talk about meetups, give some stuff away, talk about your website, talk about your closed Facebook group. If you're not building community, you need to start doing that. We really messed this up. We didn't start our closed Facebook group until April of this year. I should have done a closed Facebook group way, way, way earlier than we did. And I love our closed Facebook group because you get a feel for your fans. You get a feel for what they really like. These are your biggest fans that you get to hang out with. So, when you interview people, is it somebody who your audience already knows? If it's not somebody who has instant name recognition, I want them to bring a story. Second, what's the hook in that story? And how do I emphasize that hook? Do I do the James Bond and have it right at the beginning? Or is it one that I slowly build up into? What I never want to do is tell me about your business and tell me a little bit about yourself. I want to have done my homework enough that I already know where we're going ahead of time. Something that does that really well is a pre-interview. If you're not sure where it's going, we just started doing this after Podcast Movement this year. So I've done maybe 6 pre-interviews now, and it's amazing. And the guests say it's amazing. I've had one guest tell me specifically that he really, really, really liked the fact that he kind of knew where I was going to go ahead of time, and he knew what I was looking for. And I was able to teach him how to get rid of some of the jargon that he was going to say. He had some financial terms that my audience wasn't going to understand because we're a beginner show. So we got rid of all that, and just taking that 15 minutes a week before was really well, worked really well. And then last, how are you building the community and talking about yourself? So, open quickly and authentically, interview well, remember the hook, build community at the end, and my final tip is own it. Whatever you do, realize that today is your work. And this tip actually isn't mine either. This comes from a guy, Roman Mars, at 99% Invisible. A lot of us have other people that edit our shows. If you have somebody else edit your show, that's great. But what Roman Mars and his team does at 99% Invisible is once the show's done and everybody thinks it's ready to go, they sit around a table and they listen to it. They listen to the entire thing. And then they all put their thumbs out, and everybody's got to give the thumbs up before they hit upload and the world hears it. I started doing that after I heard Roman Mars do that. I have Steve Stewart, who's fantastic, edit our shows. But Steve does an edit, and then I get it back, and I listen to it again. And I'd say we take out 4 or 5 minutes after on that final cut, and then I feel great. And then in our close Facebook group or on Twitter or wherever people are talking to us, I know what the current show is because we're usually working 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time. So own the show and make sure when your work goes out that you give it the thumbs up so that people can love it as much as you do. I think, we've got, 10 minutes? So if you've got questions, I got time. Yes?
We enjoyed that, thank you. Just wondering the split between interviewing someone and just doing it yourself. Do you have a split between where you're just talking on the podcast or you're always interviewing people?
I think so the question is, the split between, do you interview other people or just talk yourself? I'll tell you, a guy toward the back of the room, David Stein, does a great job of being on the microphone by himself. Joshua Sheets, is Joshua here? Yeah, Joshua Sheets does a great job of being on the microphone by himself. I think it's more about knowing you. I hear those two guys, and I'm amazed that they can sit and keep me involved as long as they can keep me involved. I can't do that. I have to have a co-host to bounce stuff off of. I have to have segments because I have ADD. So if it goes longer than 8 minutes, I'm like, come on, let's go. But I can listen to Joshua for an hour, just talk to me on the microphone. So I think it's knowing you, knowing your personality, and the material. Which one's better for the material, or what you're trying to accomplish with your show. So I don't know if I gave you an answer.
What was the answer?
Yeah, it depends. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Preparing your interviewees. Should we have more of an off-the-cuff conversation, or should we tell them what's coming? Adam in the back of the room will tell you that we rarely prepare anybody ahead of time. But the pre-interview, what I like teaching them now, which Adam hasn't gone through this. Now I like telling people kind of what I'm looking for. I kind of tell Adam a little bit about what I'm looking for. Here's what we're going to do today. I want to make sure we cover these points. Now I try to have them. I ask them a few sample questions, but I never give them question, only because I want it to be a natural conversation. But I'm okay with the fact that we've had pieces of this conversation before, So we used to have something. So I worked in telemarketing when I was in college. Horrible job, raising money for the university I went to. But what I learned from there, you could have a script where you had, hi, my name is Joe, welcome to the Stacking Benjamin Show. Or you can have something called a call guide, which is what we used. And it was when you talk to somebody and you're raising money, you're a student at the university, you want to get across this point, this point, this point, this point. So with my interviewees now, I have more of a call guide approach. We want to make sure we cover this, but if we take some detours through there, that's fine. The pre-interview is one thing that I like. The second thing is I'm now okay with stopping an interview partway through. I wasn't okay with that, and I still try not to because I don't want my guest to be nervous. But if it's not going the way I want, I'll say, you know what, I think we're going to cut that, and I'd like you to say that differently. Which sounds like, if I were a journalist, that would be horrible. No, tell me you killed the guy, right? But I'm not a journalist, and there are points, my listeners are trying to get something from this guest, and if the guest is working their way around a circle, I want to make sure that my guest gets the love they deserve, which is why I brought them on the show. And I want to make sure my audience gets the most out of them. So I'll stop and I say, yeah, I don't think you want to say it that way. I think you might want to say it more kind of this way. Use your own words, so we'll do that sometimes too. The third thing, which we did recently, is I'm also okay with editing the hell out of the show. If you give me stuff and I'll let you talk and I'm like, yeah, none of this is making it. So I'll sometimes, we don't do tremendous editing, but I had a guy on in August that I had to ask him a question 3 times. I said, so tell us specifically about cash flow. What is it about cash flow what do you do specifically to maximize cash flow? Well, in my book, How to Maximize Your Cash Flow, I'm like, oh, man. Because all he's doing is selling books. In my book, How to Maximize Your Cash Flow, we talk about how to do that. And man, it's important to maximize your cash flow. So then I said, okay, so what specifically do you do to maximize your cash flow? And he said, well, it's really important to maximize your cash flow. You gotta take it, you gotta tweak things, just tweak your budget is what I'd say to do. Tweak your budget. Well, what specifically do you do to tweak your budget? Finally, the 3rd time we got it. I way over answered your question. But anyway, yes.
How about some tools for organic growth in the early days as far as gaining listenership? Maybe are you providing or have you provided resources for the guests to improve them to share that episode?
We don't, and we never have. And we do now, excuse me. We didn't in the early days, and I just wanted to make a show that people wanted to return to and listen to again. And if I had somebody on, here's what I do, and for those of you that have been on my show, you'll recognize this. We will apologize, which is a little bit of a false apology. We'll say, Lisa, I am so sorry, but we're going to be lighting you up on Twitter tomorrow for being on your show. We're going to be talking about you all the time, so you might want to turn your notifications off. What am I really saying? God, I hope you share it. Please share the show, because we're sharing you all over with our people. So that's what we do. And I have had people tell me, they're like, my God, I didn't realize that I truly had to turn my notifications off. Chris.
So going back then to like your older shows where in the beginning it felt like it was good, and then you moved to 100 episodes later and you realize you made some mistakes in the past. Are you going back and like switching out old sponsors that are no longer sponsors? Or are you going back and switching out maybe intros on the most popular downloaded ones? Or are you just leaving those?
Did everybody hear the question? Part of our, so what am I doing sponsor-wise? What am I doing with old shows? Do I go back and edit old shows? Are you asking that too?
So, like, basically, you're so far into, a couple years now, 2013. Are you going back and fixing any of the mistakes you made, or are you just leaving?
No. Yeah, I don't have time for that. We're doing 3 shows a week, so I'm always thinking forward. Roman Mars said this thing that I appreciated, which is, he said he's embarrassed by this. A year ago, he was embarrassed by the stuff from 2 years ago, and I totally agree with that. I listened to my stuff from 2 years ago. It's horrible. This year, I'm embarrassed by the stuff that we did last year, and I'm hoping like hell that a year from now, I'm embarrassed by the crap that we're doing today. But and I love that approach. So I'm always thinking ahead, like how do we just make it better tomorrow? But part of our value proposition with our sponsors, we have Matt here from M1 Finance, one of our sponsors, is that we won't change out the sponsors. And the longer you sponsor a show, so we do 8 weeks on and then a week off. We used to not take that week off, and then we found shows were going out late. I didn't care as much about who the guests were. The scripts were getting sloppy because we were tired. So now we go 8 weeks off, and then we have a week where Griffin, the intern, the FinTern, comes down and plays old episodes, right? So during that week, part of our discussion with our sponsors are, the longer you sponsor us, the better chance people are going to have of hearing that again in the future. So if we play, like next week is our off week, I might play a sponsor that hasn't sponsored our show in 2 years. But that was what we agreed to at the time, and I plan on sticking with that. And that's why we can't really do dynamic ad insertion. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that concept, but for the Stacking Benjamin show, that's really hard. We talked to a company, Wondery, about doing that, where they dynamically put ads in your show, and that violates what I told my sponsor that we do, number one. And number two, I like anyway, that whole approach. Sorry. Yes, sir.
I see there's some people that will do a Facebook Live, maybe turn it into a podcast. There's other people that will do a podcast and then turn it into a Facebook Live, even though it's not really live. Do you think any of that has any merit, or would you recommend one or the other?
I think again, it's tough though. Like I listen to Tim Ferriss, and if you listen to his podcast, he does some of the things that are outtakes from his TV show. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And it's really, the audio is a little worse. And like a lot of podcast listeners, I'm a little bit of an audio snob, and you can tell it's made for TV, so it doesn't have the same. So realize, I don't think you're going to have as much of a reach if you change it over. Like we take our shows and we put them on YouTube with just a static thing on the background, but nobody. I mean, who wants to sit on YouTube and listen to our show when you can get it with better audio elsewhere? I think it has merit. I just don't think it'll grow as quickly because it's not native to that platform and meant for that platform. I was hearing about shows last night where somebody does that, where they have like audio on them and you can watch them making the show if you want to. And Lou Mangello does that with the WDW podcast. He's a big podcaster where he does that. We are so not advanced enough to do that. We just, yeah. I mean, even for us, Facebook Live, I was scared to death of going on camera for our first Facebook Live. So. Oh, wow, we overdid it on technology. I thought I needed an awesome mic and a big old mixer and all kinds of stuff. ATR 2100 is a fantastic microphone. Love that. You've got great stuff on here. GarageBand is okay. That's the way we started, was with GarageBand. I think Audacity is a better way to edit your shows. We now use Audition. I like Hindenburg for editing shows. I don't use it yet, but man, I want to go that way. What else? I think if you've got a computer, a Skype connection, and a good microphone, and Audacity's free to edit your stuff, I think that's pretty much all you need. But we definitely overdid that. And I will tell you this, too. If you don't have a podcast, we obsessed about the equipment. And I'll tell you, it's not about the equipment. Like, nobody went up to Michelangelo and said, so what's that paintbrush you use? It's about the art. The equipment question's great, but once you get it to a decent level, I think working on that stuff is way, way, way more important. Yes, sir.
Just wondering what the ideal like for a podcast.
Man, this is my favorite topic because Roger's laughing because we debate this all the time because people say my show's too long. I don't know. So here's what I like. I think you have to be true to the material, right? So there are shows that are 5 minutes long that should be 5 minutes long. There are shows that are, Tim Ferriss shows will sometimes go 2 hours long. The giant bombcast, people like video games, those shows are sometimes 3 and 4 hours long. I've been listening to podcasts almost since the time they began. I'm not a completionist. And I think if you listen to podcasts, like I don't care about listening to the whole thing. I'm not that OCD. So I'm not worried about people finishing a show. I just want to make sure they come back for the next one. You know what I mean? So if the show's boring, then I want to stop and make it shorter. But if it seems like it's ending too quick, I've got this thing though in my head. Anybody a big fan of The West Wing? You know how The West Wing, Aaron Sorkin would always ramp that baby up the last 5 minutes so that you got done with the show and you wanted to go right into the next one. I've been kind of playing with that lately. Like at the end of the show, I want people to feel like they want to binge on our show. So try to make the end kind of fun. But we have this track at the end of our show. I stole this from somebody. There was a show called the Major Nelson Podcast. And I've been listening to this show for maybe 8 months. And the show ends. And then I think I was like getting ready for work one day. The show ends and I let it keep running. And then all of a sudden I hear people talking. And I go back in the bathroom and there's been a hidden track on this show since the beginning and I never knew about it. They have this thing called the after show. So if you listen to our show, we stop talking and there's 45 seconds of silence and then we start talking again. And we do it almost every show. And I love it when people write to us and they go, I never knew that there was this hidden track. David? Yes. I think the only ones, those of you guys that have podcasts for a while, the only ones we really had to sign up for specifically were Apple Podcasts, which is iTunes. You had to sign up for Google Play. You had to sign up for TuneIn. And you had to sign up for Stitcher. And you'd have to sign up for SoundCloud. So those ones you have to sign up separately. If you use a company, we use a company called Libsyn, and Libsyn will feed to all those. Once I sign up with TuneIn, I just tell Libsyn that I signed up, and then we only upload once, and Libsyn sends it everywhere. So I don't have to. iHeartRadio is another one, and we've applied for Spotify. Nick, are you in Spotify? Yeah, we haven't been accepted. Joshua Sheets apparently slipped him $20 because he's in Spotify. Oh, dude, that's great. No. Hopefully, I was talking to Rob Welch about that. I'm like, I don't know why we're not in Spotify. How do we not get Spotify? He's like, they just, I don't know. They let the cool people in, like Joshua. But so you got to apply for Spotify also. Next question. Anybody else? Yes. Jamila. Oh, I love this advice. Great question was about sponsorship. I would build sponsors into your show from the very beginning. And the reason is I've listened to a lot of podcasts, as I've said 50 times, and this always cracks me up. And this is when we decided to create our podcast. We had sponsorships from the very beginning. We put sponsor spots in it because I would listen to a podcast. There's one podcast in particular I listened to. I listened to it for like a year and a half, and all of a sudden they went from no sponsors to sponsors. And I remember I'm on a run, and all of a sudden I hear these ad spots. I'm like, these greedy, monetizing bastards, right? But then I thought, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I listen to these 5 other shows that have sponsors, and I'm not saying that about them. So I wanted to train my listeners from the very beginning that there's going to be sponsor spots here and here in every single show. So we did 2 things. We signed up for a commission junction. And so if you listen to our very early shows, they're sponsored by Hotels.com. Hotels.com has no idea they sponsored our show. It was just a commission junction link. I don't know that we made any money. We made 30 cents or something, but we put it in there specifically for that. One of our early sponsors, though, I got from FinCon, and this is, and I think I'll end on this story, and if people want to stay and talk, I can hang out. But so I'm at FinCon, and Fidelity Investments was here, and we're pretty damn new. And I'm like, how cool would it be to say the Stacking Benjamin Show sponsored by Fidelity Investments? Wouldn't that be awesome? And my listeners would think that we are this huge podcast because we're sponsored by Fidelity Investments. So I walk up to the Fidelity guy, my Adam's app, I can feel my heartbeat. I'm like, yeah, do you guys sponsor podcasts? He's like, we've never really tried that. He goes, I really work with bloggers. But so do you want to do like a sponsor post type of thing? I go, no, I want to do it's a sponsored podcast where you sponsor our podcast. He's like, well, I got like $100. How many shows will that buy me? I said, it'll buy you 2 months. And I knew we weren't getting anybody else. So for 2 months, for $100, I got to say, Stacking Benjamins is brought to you by Fidelity Investments. that was it. So anyway. All right, thank you for coming, everyone. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.